Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, my name is Mika Mioni, and I'm the Training and Policy Manager here at CalVCP Headquarters Office. And I'm really excited this month for our trauma-informed workshop. We have actually 3 guest speakers, as I'm sure you guys saw on the flyer and on BoardNet and through the email notifications that Haley's been sending out. So this is a kind of a unique topic, I think, for us to explore as an organization. We're going to be learning about the T visas and the U visas. And that is something that can affect us and our claimants on a couple of different levels. One, when we're looking at eligibility, if someone has a T visa or a U visa, that basically verifies that they've been a crime victim. You can't get a T visa or a U visa without having really clear evidence that you've been victimized. And then the other thing is that when someone is given a T visa or a U visa, in many cases, they also get certain benefits, financial benefits and other benefits that we may need to look at and may need to consider when looking at claims. So to start off with, our first 2 guest speakers are Theo Cuison, who is an immigration attorney with Weave, and then we have Kishwer Barrica, who is a staff attorney with Opening Doors, and they're going to be talking with you about the T visa. And we're going to explore the background, the history of the T visa, what are the requirements for getting a T visa, what's the process, and then what happens once someone is issued a T visa. So we're really excited you guys are here. They'll be speaking for the next hour, then we'll take a mini break, and then our next speaker, Kathy, will be here to talk about the U visa. During the mini break, we have a handout from Kathy, and then we'll get going again until noon. Thanks, everyone. Come on up.
So first of all, I just wanted to introduce you folks to the Sacramento Rescue and Restore Coalition. It's a federally funded program that's administered by my organization, Opening Doors, as well as my sister's house. And one of the components is for attorneys and paralegals. It's called the Legal Forum. And so we gather periodically to discuss trafficking cases. So if you have friends or family who are attorneys and interested in getting involved in trafficking cases, feel free to reach out to us after this presentation. And what was I going to say? So those are just some of the participants that attend the Legal Forum, and this training and the PowerPoint presentation are actually funded by that grant.
Right, so today, depending on time, we have a pretty packed agenda. So in general, we'll be talking about the T visa, and if we have time, talk about kind of the next steps for a person who is applying for a T visa, what happens after they receive the T visa, and how that leads on to being able to ask for a green card and other kinds of remedies available to them.
So quick question, is anyone an attorney here? Okay, great. Good to know. So we're not going to get too detailed into statutes and regulations. So we want to make this as easy to understand as possible. And with that in mind, we have a few case scenarios at the end that we're hoping we can go through with you folks.
Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background information, I thought this quote from a former INS spokeswoman was very pertinent to kind of understanding the T and U visa and immigration law in general. So a spokeswoman named Karen Crocher said in April 24th, 2001, in the Washington Post, immigration is a mystery and a mastery of obfuscation, and the lawyers who can figure it out are worth their weight in gold. And you noticed here at VCP you had scales in the restroom. So I thought that was interesting because Kishwer is definitely worth her weight in gold in this topic. I might be worth my weight in silver. So after 9/11, what was formerly known as the INS kind of broke down into different groups. So you might have come across this in your general life or just interacting with people in the community. So the INS, the Immigration and Nationality Service, became USCIS, which is the US Citizenship and Immigration Services. And they're in charge of the paper application. So they process the T visa, the U visa, and then the VAWA applications. ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So they are the people who enforce immigration laws. So agents out in the field, the attorneys who represent the government in deportation proceedings, that's ICE. And then CBP was formerly the Border Patrol, but now it's called US Customs and Border Protection. There's different kinds of immigration status. So I think the thing that people are most familiar with are US citizens and people who don't have any kind of paperwork. Kind of in the middle are people who do have some kind of documentation. So in the immigration field, we refer to them as non-citizens. So they can be two different kinds of people. Immigrants, or people who have green cards, and then non-immigrants. So people who are here on a student visa, on a visitor visa, investment visa, and T visas and U visas fall into that. They're considered non-immigrants.
And just out of curiosity, is anyone familiar with the T visa or the trafficking visa? Have you come across it before? Okay, one or two people. Yeah, so it's not very well known, and we're going to get into that later. And the point that we're going to keep hitting again and again is, if in doubt, refer to an immigration attorney. So, this entire process, this is not a law school class. We're just here to tell you, a little bit, and just refer is the main point. Yeah, just keep going. Yeah, so the federal definition of trafficking is basically what we go by. And the two forms of trafficking that we focus on, or that everything is categorized into, is sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So sex trafficking is what you're going to see in the news. It's what you're going to see in, Liam Neeson doing Taken. Is that the name of the movie? Yeah, you're going to see that, prostitutes being forced to do sex work abroad and here in the USA, white slavery, there's sex trafficking is very well known. It's good to also know about labor trafficking because it occurs much more frequently. And trafficking itself is not limited to women. It also affects men and families as a whole. So the basic components of trafficking that you have to look for are force, fraud, and coercion, and we'll get into that later. Yeah, so here are just some examples of commercial sex acts, sex tourism, people going abroad to Thailand and other countries for purposes of soliciting prostitutes. Massage parlors, we do a lot of work with law enforcement here in Sacramento, team up when they do raids where women are doing massage, but not, really doing massage. Also, there's a lot of internet sites that you can go to, even on Craigslist, asking for escorts, which are actually reality sex trafficking.
So just kind of touching on labor trafficking, it is a little bit more ubiquitous than people think. And it comes a lot where people are in the service industries, so agriculture, landscaping, construction, and it happens a lot more often than people realize.
Yeah, so we do a lot of work with farm workers who are being threatened in certain ways to perform labor. A lot of waiters, waitresses, busboys who are undocumented immigrants and are told, you're getting this much money, and if not, we're going to deport you, or we're going to report you to ICE. So I have a joke with my husband. I say, I can never go to brunch anymore because there's places where I'm like, okay, there's a client here, there's a client there. And then also construction and right now the automobile industry, we've been getting a lot of mechanics that are being forced to work for little or no pay.
So these statistics are from 2010, so they might be a little bit older. So this is according to the US Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Justice. So about 15,000 to 18,000 people were estimated to be trafficked into the United States, and about half of them were children. And worldwide, the estimate back then was for about 800,000 people trafficked a year. And the top countries for people in fiscal year 2010 were from Thailand, India, Mexico, the Philippines, Haiti, Honduras, El Salvador, and the Dominican Republic.
Can you go back just one? So this is just from 2008. We're going to have to update these stats. But to just give you an example, a survey done of trafficking service providers here, 90% were female, which is not indicative of how many victims there actually are. But it was interesting. They saw a 50-50 balance of sex trafficking and labor trafficking, which is also not representative. We believe there's a lot more labor trafficking going on. Yeah, so this chart we call AMP, and it's a handy little graph that trafficking screeners can use and attorneys can use to figure out if, under the federal definition of that's necessary to apply for the T visa, whether someone is truly a victim. And so, on the left is what the action is that the trafficker is doing, whether they're recruiting, what means they use, whether they're forcing someone, whether they're tricking them by saying, I'm going to pay you $10 an hour. You start the job actually and pay you $5, and then what purpose it's for. So of course, each word has its own separate definition in the regulations, but we'll get into that. So just, okay. Oh no, sorry. Actually, go back then. Yeah. So for minors, folks under 18. Consent is not necessary. You don't have to say, oh, someone forced me to have sex and that's why I did it for money. That's not necessary. They're a minor. They are not able to consent. Mm-hmm.
And so the different means that traffickers can employ to force people into a trafficking situation. So there's force, fraud, or coercion. So force is something I think people are kind of familiar with: sexual assault, physical violence against the trafficked person. Fraud, I think, is a little bit less known. So there are times when there are advertisements placed in foreign countries saying, if you pay us a certain amount of money, or if you come here, we can find you a way to get to the United States. Other ways that they do it is to withhold a person's wages. And a lot of times people are coming into the United States to be able to support family members in a different country. And then coercion, I think, is also something that people are familiar with, where you threaten people in your home country. So a lot of times the traffickers know connections and are able to leverage that, that knowledge into forcing a person into a trafficking situation.
Yeah, and it's not always as black and white as you would think. We had a screening done recently where an agricultural worker was living on a ranch and working for a farmer, and the initial screener said, well, it's not trafficking. You could have just walked off the fence, walked off the land. There was no fence keeping you in. You weren't, chained to a dungeon in a basement. I don't understand what was keeping you there. There was no force, fraud, or coercion. But as we started cataloging each individual interaction he had with the trafficker, or the trafficker said, oh, cameras are watching you, constant verbal abuse, those little things added up together created a climate of fear, which qualified him.
So that's the federal definition. The penal code in the state of California is found at section 236. So in some ways, it's a little bit more expansive than the federal definition.
Yeah, so often when people think of trafficking, they think of, say, for example, a van full of people, stuffed in on top of each other, sneaking across the border, and that's trafficking. Not necessarily. That could be smuggling, illegal border crossing. It could lead into actual trafficking, but there's a clear difference between the smuggling and the trafficking. The trafficking involves some sort of labor, and it does not require transportation. So it's an actual crime. It's not just people being, funneled into the country.
So different signs that a person is a victim of trafficking. If they have a hard time constructing events in a chronological manner, because I think that's what people are kind of tuned to looking for. If you're able to tell your story, this is what happened here, this is what happened next, without realizing that sometimes people lose their sense of where they are and what time it is. Other signs, a big sign that I've noticed is if it's very hard for a person to come to you, there's some kind of restriction on their ability to travel that's placed on them by their trafficker.
Yeah, one of the indicators for me that I've been seeing a lot is lives and works in the same place. We had an automotive technician in Solano County whose trafficker had him actually sleeping in the garage where the vehicles were detailed. And the more that we spoke with them, the more we realized this is trafficking. Is anyone familiar with the power and control wheel in domestic violence? You've all seen that? Mm-hmm. So we've adapted it, not we personally, but some genius has adapted it to fit sex trafficking, and it makes it very helpful to identify as you're going through that, and you can definitely find that online. It's very helpful when you are trying to figure out if someone may be in that situation. But don't figure it out. Send them to an attorney.
The T visa, just in general, is allowing a human trafficking victim to stay in the United States in a non-immigrant status for 4 years. After 3 years, or at the conclusion of the criminal prosecution, they're able to, the word there says adjust status to LPR. So what that basically means is be able to get a green card after 3 years or after the criminal case is over. In addition to that, there is work authorization and the chance to reunite with your family members and bring over different family members depending if you're older than 21 or under 21. Also access to public benefits. And one distinction with the U visa is I think maybe people have heard that you need to get some kind of proof from a law enforcement agency that you've been cooperating with the law enforcement agency by having them sign a certification form. It's not required in the T visa context, but it's strongly encouraged by USCIS to be part of the package.
So the nice thing about T visas is that there are a lot available. And not a lot. 5,000 is nothing compared to, say, the 10,000 U visas available a year. But no one applies for T visas except for a few practitioners who are familiar with them. Even immigration attorneys are not always aware that it is a potential remedy. So 5,000 are available a year. In 2013, you'll see about 800 or so were approved. So we're always encouraging people to apply. With other visas, you start applying, you can wait for years while it's processing. With this one, within 6 to 8 months, you'll get a response and you'll know, am I going to get a work card or not?
Yeah, so it looks, the question was, it looks like there's such a high approval rate for T visas, if that's the same in other contexts as well. And what do we think is the reason behind that? I think part of the reason is because it's not so well known. So the people who do the T visas are very good at their job, and they kind of know what cases are good cases to put forward. And I think another reason might be for U visas. Back when they started it was roughly the same amount of time. But I tell my clients now, so if someone walks into my office tomorrow and they can apply for a U visa and we start the process, I tell them the first contact that you'll get from immigration will probably be 2.5 years from tomorrow. And the first time that someone will be able to become a green card holder is about 7 years, I think. So if you think someone is eligible for a T visa, send them to a legal service provider.
So with this one, you know, a lot of crimes happened a long time ago and the individual never reported them. We had a client from LA who was brought in to be a movie star with a talent agency, and she ended up being forced to prostitute for years and years and years. And this all happened in the 80s. So we thought, okay, you know what, it's too old. The deadline to apply is the last act has to have occurred in October 2000. For her, it ended up being that the trafficker was continuing to blackmail her and threaten her family up until 2007. So we were able to file for her, but there are definitely cases in which it's just occurred so long ago that there's nothing we can do.
So some of the benefits of the T visa, just very quickly, a person in the United States, even if they don't have any kind of legal status, the law still applies to them when it comes to labor protection and protection from violence.
Okay, there's no way anybody can read that. I can't read that. The main thing to know is that trafficking victims are available to get services, public benefit services. And this is something that we are advocating for very strongly, because although there is an all-county letter, not all counties are aware that trafficking victims are eligible for this because they've never seen it. So we're often struggling to have our clients have continuous, like 8 months of services. A lot of times they start, stop, but they are eligible for 8 months of services here in California. Yeah, so there was a letter written, I think in the early 2000s, that explained that through this California, what is it, Victims of Crime Act? Yeah, that victims of crime were eligible for cash aid, food stamps, Medi-Cal, and so it exists, and we always had that letter available for the folks who are doing the intake, but it's still been a struggle.
So the all-county letter is basically, so there's the law, then there's regulations, and then I forget which department does it, but they, yeah, so they put out a letter to all of the county's social services departments, basically saying this is what the interpretation of the law is. So we give it to eligibility workers, or we give it to clients to give to eligibility workers to kind of smooth over the process to say, so in your handbook, this is where it says that I can do this. Yes.
Right, so they're eligible even while the attorney is in the process of compiling the T visa and has not yet filed. They're still eligible, and then after it's filed, they're eligible until they get an outcome in the case. But it's something very few people know about, because they say, wait, you have no social security, you're undocumented, there's no way you qualify. Yeah?
So what do they get denied?
Then our social worker goes in, and then if that fails, then I go in that fails, then we get some legal services, legal aid involved.
I strongly encourage, Kishwer and I are both alums of legal services in Northern California, in the Sacramento office and from the Yolo County office. So any legal aid organization will be very well equipped to understand public benefits as it applies to trafficking victims. So I encourage you to send them there.
So a little bit about what we do here at Opening Doors. We're one of a few Sacramento programs that provide case management services to victims of human trafficking. So that may include legal services, but we also have a social worker goes in and helps with, emergency housing, shelter, getting benefits, possibly, employment, education, training. And our worker has a cell phone that's on 24/7 and the clients are available. A lot of times we get referrals from the national hotline that's based out in DC, but we're also getting referrals from all over the place. Former clients, social service providers, attorneys. Any of you find someone, send them over, because it's really nice to have not just an immigration attorney looking out for you, but also someone helping you navigate as you recover from the trauma of your experience.
I think we're running a little bit short on time because we wanted to provide some case examples. So very quickly, for the T visa, you must have been a victim of a severe form of trafficking. You're here in the United States. You've helped a law enforcement agency if they've asked you in a reasonable manner to assist them. And then you would suffer extreme hardship if you were forced to return to your home country. And then last one is admissible to the US. So even if you meet all of that, if you have certain things on your record, if you've been previously deported, if you have a criminal record, there's another kind of step that you have to overcome to be able to get a T visa.
Do we want to skip to the case scenario? Sorry, there's like a million slides. Unless you're filing a T visa, you do not need to know this. And if you are filing a T visa, then you're probably going to get in trouble. Okay, and we cover actually in this presentation some of the other remedies that trafficking victims may be eligible for, and I think the next presenter is going to be focusing on the U visa, but there's other things that folks may be eligible for as well. But we really wanted to get into situations that have occurred to actual clients. Some of them are ours, and I borrowed a few from Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, which is CAST, based in LA, nationally renowned human trafficking organization. So I was gonna have you guys read, pick a volunteer and read it, but you kind of need binoculars, right? Okay.
I think the folks on the live stream might not have access to the PowerPoint too. So first case example is Yvonne. Upon arriving in the United States, Yvonne was kept in isolation. She was given a place to sleep in the basement and was told not to speak to anyone, or she would be returned, or she would be turned over to immigration services. She was still forced to do the housekeeping she was hired to do, but was never paid for her work and felt that she had no one to turn to for help. She was also forced to go to college in her cousin's name. Occasionally, she was allowed to drive around her cousins, but her parents said that they had a GPS system that could track her movements.
So what do you guys think? Trafficking or not trafficking? Living with a family member. Okay.
Forced to go to school in her cousin's name.
You mind going back just really quickly? Okay. So where was she staying? In the basement. Where was she working? In the house. Was she working of her own free will? No, she was forced. Okay. Do you think there was a climate of fear that she was living in? Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, she was being, her movements were being tracked, or she legitimately thought they were being tracked. She was told that she could be deported, picked up by ICE and deported. So what do you guys think? Labor trafficking? Yes, no? Yes. All right, that's pretty clear cut.
And family members can traffic you as well. It doesn't have to be a stranger. So next one, Melanie. Melanie was put in the foster care program at age 8. She almost always felt alone. When she was 13, at school, an older boy asked her out. They dated. He told her he loved her and that he wanted to be a family with her. She dropped out of school and ran away from the foster care program to be with him. They couldn't make their bills. One day, her boyfriend told her that if she loved him, she would find a way to make money. He mentioned that he knew girls that were walking on Watt Avenue, and if she did that for one day, they would make enough money to pay for a month of rent. Melanie, afraid that her boyfriend wouldn't love her anymore if she didn't find the money, went out on Watt Avenue one night. A man picked her up almost immediately and took her to a hotel. Only 10 minutes after leaving the hotel, she was picked up by the police for prostitution. She was now 14 years old.
Okay, so Melanie was between the ages of 13 and 14, having sex with folks per her boyfriend's friendly suggestion. Is it okay? Because she said, of course I will. Nobody was pushing her to do it. Does that make it okay? Right, exactly. Perfect, perfect. So sex trafficking, labor trafficking? Yeah, perfect. And this was actually one of my clients.
And in Sacramento, there have been a lot of moves towards not criminalizing the victims of human trafficking. There are steps being made in other counties as well, but I think in Sacramento we're a little bit ahead of the curve and have pushed the people and decision makers to recognize victims of human trafficking.
Yeah, and one of the hardest parts for prosecutors is not identifying the victims, it's actually going after the traffickers or perpetrators. In this case, boyfriend knew where she lived, they went to the same high school, he was harassing her on social media, his friends were harassing her on social media. So in this case, she didn't want to go up on a stand and testify.
Okay, another case example, Carlita. I am 16 years old and from Mexico. I came to the US because I wanted to make money to support my family. I knew a woman in the market who could help get me to the US, and I asked her if we could make some arrangements. She said I would have to pay $5,000 to get to the US. I borrowed $3,500 and obtained a passport. A relative in the US was to pay the other $2,500 when I reached the US. I crossed into the US with another group of people and was placed in a house in the US. I'm not certain of the location. We slept on the floor and it was very crowded. The smugglers in the house raped some of the women and girls in the house, but I was not raped. I was scared that this would happen to me. My passport was taken from me. I was not allowed to leave the house and was told that my relative would have to pay an additional $5,000, not the $2,500 I was told. My relative was not able to pay this money, and I was kept in the house almost 2 months until the house was raided by ICE.
So in this case, Carlita was told, okay, pay me X amount of money and I will help you come to the country. And when she came over, the smuggler said, no, actually, you owe me a substantially higher amount. Smuggling or trafficking? Smuggling. Is there any labor involved, whether commercial sex acts or house cleaning or no labor involved? Could she qualify for something, do you think? Was she a victim of crime?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So not necessarily kidnapping so much, because it's quite common that folks, stay at a certain location while things are ironed out, but it could be. one of the things that is very common for my clients who are crossing the border, who are women, is to take birth control pills before they start because rape is almost a certain occurrence. So this is nothing new. She was not a direct victim of rape, but because she was an indirect victim, she was watching all of these other folks get victimized, she may be eligible for a U visa, which your next speaker is going to be going into. And the other thing she may be eligible for is extortion. Okay, last one.
Okay, last one. Kim. I am from Korea and I came to the US because a man I met promised that I could make a lot of money in the United States and that he would get me a job working as a babysitter or a waitress. He said I would have to pay $1,000 to get to the US and I would have to pay another $8,000 working in the US. Once in the US, I was told that I would not work in a restaurant or as a babysitter, but instead I would have to work as a prostitute. The man threatened to tell my family that I worked as a prostitute. I also knew they were a part of a large criminal gang and very dangerous. I worked as a prostitute on the street where I was often left alone. I had a cell phone. I was arrested by the police on 2 occasions, and I lied about my name, age, and where I was from because I was scared. Each time the men came and bailed me out of jail and told me I owed them even more money. I escaped from the men about 5 years ago and have been living with my relatives.
What do you guys think? Sex trafficking? Mm-hmm. What about the fact that she was told that she would have to keep working to pay off this $8,000? Yeah, so that is another example of forced fraud or coercion known as peonage, or a slightly similar one is debt bondage. So that is also a qualifying factor. What about the fact that she was arrested but gave a false name? Will immigration find out? Yeah, so if she was fingerprinted, every visa applicant has to go for a fingerprinting appointment, and that will come up, which is why it's really important to, gain the trust of the client so they disclose these things so we can work on, a possible pardon before they actually apply.
Yeah, and working with victims, it's also important to realize where they are in the process. So some people are not ready just yet to talk about and deal and put in a full application. And as attorneys, our role is a little bit different than a social service provider or a counselor. And that was something that was very hard for me to learn as a young attorney, because you want to help your clients as much as possible and kind of be and help them in every way that you can. But for attorneys, our interest is helping along their legal interests. So sometimes we have to ask about things that they might not be ready to talk about. And we have to get into a place where they can trust us and say, there was this one time where this happened, I gave a different name, and be comfortable with that. And it's important to send someone to a good legal service provider, because a lot of times people don't know what their other eligibility might be. And that has happened a lot with my clients, where they come in and they say, oh, I'm definitely eligible for a U visa. I've informed myself on it. And then we do a fingerprint check and a check of records with the Immigration Service, and something else pops up. And it's a lot easier than having to go through a declaration where it's 7-10 pages of really intimate details about what happened to you, and providing photos, letters of support. It's really hard not to re-traumatize a person again when you're going through that process. So if there's something that's a lot faster for them, that's something that or easier for them as well, it's something that we encourage.
And trauma manifests itself in very interesting ways: memory loss, anxiety, PTSD. So there's times where we refer them to just a counselor, say someone at Weave or similar agencies for counseling. And then there's times that for purposes of showing the damage that the trafficking caused, if it didn't cause physical damage, we send them to a psychologist that can correctly diagnose, whatever emotional, damage that happened.
In the response to someone being the victim of human trafficking or of sexual assault or domestic violence, there's no one correct way to respond to that. So we've had, I've had clients who, they're laughing when they're describing really hard details about the things that have happened to them. And if you're not familiar with that being a possibility, you might think, oh, this person is not taking this process seriously. They're just laughing about it. Maybe they're not telling me the truth. And it's hard to divorce yourself from that and kind of step back a little and say, a person's response is very personal. They can be laughing, they can be crying, they can be very quiet. They might ask someone to tell their story for them. And so to be open to that possibility and to know that, maybe you're not going to get the story from them in this meeting. It might take 2 or 3 more meetings where they're more comfortable with you, but that's a possibility.
And the ultimate goal is to empower them, maybe for the first time in their life. Well, let me rephrase that. The ultimate goal is to get them legal status, obviously. But one of our goals is to empower them so they know that as the client, they're the boss. We're presenting them with these possibilities, but they are the ones who are ultimately in the driver's seat. There was something else I was going to say. With me, I can work pretty closely with the social worker and figure out a way to direct them to the other holistic services they might need, and that's really a blessing.
Yes.
All right, let's open it up for some questions. Haley and I do have a mic, so please wait for us to get to you so our viewers can hear the question as well. Any questions so far from this first presentation? Way in the back, Haley.
Can you explain T2, T3, T4, T5 visas, and do you guys get involved with that also? I also want to talk about human slavery versus human trafficking. Do you have experiences with that also? Thank you.
What are the questions fed through the live stream itself? Okay. In the slides, there's something that said T1, T2, T3. So that's just the type of visa. So T1 and U1, if there's one, that means it's the the principal applicant. So the main person who was the victim of human trafficking or of a crime. And the rest of the numbers are your spouse, your parent, if you're under 21, your sibling, your children, things like that. And we do assist with that. And
so far as slavery versus human trafficking, we call human trafficking modern slavery. It may not be, so much, it may not be as well documented in the media, it may not be literally, iron cuffs around the fist and chains, but the way that we phrase it is human trafficking is modern slavery. They're one and the same.
Could you explain what information is part of a T visa application?
So T visa application, there's all the immigration paperwork that they ask for, which I think is more than 20.
Like a few forms.
Like more than 20 sheets of paper. And
yeah.
Then, the form that says that we're allowed to help someone as their attorney is 4 pages long. I don't know why it's 4 pages long. I used to be 1 page long. So the forms that immigration requires, 3 passport photographs, and then kind of supporting documents. So for me, I tell my clients that the most important document is their declaration, where they detail what happened to them and kind of their background story. And also it serves a double purpose. So they talk about the human trafficking, and then also if they have admissibility problems. So it came up before where there's, so even if you're a victim of trafficking, there's another step that you have to go to say, that I'm allowed to come to the United States. So if they have another issue, like there's a crime on their record or they've been deported before, kind of the reasons why they merit or they deserve discretion from the Immigration Service. And any kind of supporting documents they have, photos, news articles, letters of support from people who are familiar with the situation. So it's not uncommon for a packet to be like 500 pages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're huge fans of over-papering. I don't know if you know that about lawyers, but if they ask for 1 page, we're going to give like 50. So, you know, we're shipping off packages like yay thick. It's practically a book. Yeah, so the same thing that Theo said, anything that we can use, we put in. We had a trafficker who was a well-known public figure, and he had some media clips that documented his love of certain weaponry. And that was very helpful in the application to show that she may have been afraid that his collection could maybe someday harm her. But so we get very creative. This is the T visa is very new compared to other immigration remedies. For that reason, you know, we're at the forefront. You know, we're doing things you don't really see in other, you know, typical visas. But as Theo said, the declaration or the personal essay or personal narrative is the most important part. And I just have them go chronologically, like I was born, I grew up, I came here, and this is what happened.
What about law enforcement endorsements and maybe letters from mental health providers, and what type of mental health providers might be included too?
All of the above.
And for the mental health provider declaration, is it only a certain licensure, or is it all licensed, or do you?
Mm-hmm.
So
what types of things would they do?
Yeah. So for me, it depends on the client's situation. If they're able to access a mental health provider and pay for them. You know, I try to work very closely with the provider and say, this is what we need, and you know, there might be chances for us to go back and forth and say, can there be a little bit more detail here? I encourage the providers to provide a copy of their CV or resume to kind of give their qualifications, because from time to time, immigration has asked, you know, this person says that they're this, how do we know? So you can look online, but they don't want to do that. So you give them a piece of paper saying, this is their qualification.
So is that person certifying on their professional opinion that that person is a human trafficking victim? Is that what the letter's about?
They could. It's not required, but they could. If they, in their professional judgment, think it's they can make that call, then.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to play this. Law enforcement, we have pretty good relationships here in Sacramento with the DAs, sheriffs, FBI, Department of Homeland Security. You know, their point people have been excellent with helping. However, it's very hard to get certificates signed by the agencies attesting to the fact that someone is a human trafficking victim, because their criteria is probably going to be different than ours. And even if they do want to sign it, by the time the wheels of bureaucracy roll around, we may have already sent it in, and that's happened quite frequently. In the cases of letters from mental health providers, there are times where we actually prefer not to send them. If we think the case is going to end up in court and opposing counsel is going to have access to something that says something that may be unflattering to the client, perhaps we may not get that done. However, there are certain cases in which there's a trauma exception that explains why the victim didn't want to report the crime to the cops. And in that case, we do get a psychologist to certify that, you know, their trauma is so extreme that they cannot possibly go before an officer of the law and talk about what happened. So it's a case-by-case basis.
I have a couple questions. Are there any costs associated with filing? And related to that, could you talk in more detail about how somebody copes between the time that they get free and the time that they actually get the visa? How do they make it work?
Yeah, so cost-wise, the T visa is free if you have broken the law in some way, such as crossing the border without permission, DUI, whatever sort of law that you've broken, we file that pardon or inadmissibility waiver. That has a fee associated with it. But, if our clients are, out of this trafficking situation, no income, they're on benefits, all we have to do is show that, and immigration waives the fee. So that cost-wise, we can usually work around that. Now the second part you were talking about was, oh yes, that is really difficult because in our case management program, which is funded by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, a federal agency out in DC, based in DC, they're only here for a limited time getting the services of a social worker, case manager, etc. If we are not able to file the visa in time, there's a lapse in services, and it can be really hard. The goal is to get it done in 4 months. Realistically, I may not get all the paperwork I need, and I'm not going to file it if I don't feel comfortable and think it's going to be denied. So there have been cases in which people have, gone in that lapse, and we had one fellow who ended up homeless and at Loaves and Fishes. So it's been tough for our clients, but we refer them to every single available resource we can to help them in that interim.
So they have like 8 months of services, did you say?
I believe so, 8 or 9 with our case management program.
Could you explain a little bit about how they would end up having to go to court? You were referring to that
yes.
a minute ago.
I have a great case going on right now in which we're hopefully going to go to court. So if the crime is fresh, if the witnesses are credible, if they're going to testify well on a witness stand, if you have plenty of evidence, then the prosecutors, in this case it's the Department of Justice, they want to go forth and take it to trial. They're always looking out for it. The bad part is by the time people come to us, the crimes are so old, there's just no way the statute of limitations has expired. But we do have a case a couple of cases that are coming up in which the government is going to be going after the trafficker in court. And so in that case, once we file the T visa, they have access to the entire T visa and can use it against the victim in court. So for that reason, we have to be very careful about what goes in there.
It comes up in different contexts as well. So if the person is married to the trafficker, if there's a divorce proceeding or a child custody proceeding, the attorney for the trafficker could ask for those documents, and it's the job of the attorney of the victim to protect. So it comes up in a bunch of different places.
Yeah.
Criminal cases, basically.
Criminal cases or divorce, child custody.
And civil cases too. We are encouraging attorneys to come forth and volunteer their time to file civil cases against, say, employers of, a restaurant employer who is, trafficking her not busboy, I guess it would be bus girl, busser, I'm not sure. At that point, a civil attorney, came in and said, I'm going to go after this person and let's see what happens. She then has access to all the documents and can use it against the employee and say, well, here you said on September 4th, I came in at 9 a.m., but I have your timesheet showing you came in at 12, lied about that. You're probably lying about everything else. So in that kind of context.
Other questions? Right, Haley's coming back.
I was wondering, do a high percentage of the applications that are approved result in some kind of conviction on the legal side, on the criminal side? Is the threshold for force, fraud, or coercion significantly different for them as it is for you guys to get an application approved? And is there any, if a conviction happens, do you guys rely at all on a conviction happening to make your process easier, or is there no relationship between what's happening on that side with you and you guys? Few questions there.
Well, yeah, so I'll try to cover all that. You know, it usually takes so long for law enforcement and the prosecutors to kind of get it together and build a strong case. We're under, you know, our clock is ticking. We want to make sure that we get in the visa so they can get their benefits, so they can stabilize their lives. So it oftentimes, you know, I had a case where the attorney filed it in 2012, the T visa, the client got it approved. Law enforcement is just now starting to prepare for the trial. So in that case, they're only looking kind of at the documents we set forth, but you know, they didn't help us in any sort of way by doing something that happened years later. And as for an approval, I don't think that an approval actually influences the case in any sort of way, because yes, the criteria is completely different. We all have different requirements. You know, immigration can approve a case, and then, you know, the Office of the Inspector General can say, no, that's not trafficking according to our standards. So we all have like different screening criteria.
And for U visas, it might influence whether or not you wait until there's a conviction. That might be a case strategy. And for criminal proceedings, the burden of proof is higher. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And for immigration, it's less than that. I don't want to misspeak and say what the burden is, but it's less than a criminal proceeding.
Thanks.
All right, let's go ahead and take, oh, Katie, one more question.
So you're talking about how there's some processes that can happen after something's been denied. Is there any chance of approval after that? Can you build a case stronger?
You can appeal or you can resubmit. I had a client who was denied because they couldn't find her ex-husband's death certificate. So they said, oh, you're married you're married to two people. She said, no, he was, you know, killed by the cartel. They never found his body. By the time we were able to get the death certificate from the Mexican consulate, they had already denied it. So in that case, once I get it, I'm just refiling. So there is a remedy, but there are cases in which, you know, there's nothing we can do.
The process usually is you submit it, and then immigration, more often than not, says approved, or, you know, there's something in the case that's a little bit weak. Can you provide us more information? And they do a request for evidence, an RFE, basically saying, so this is what we think about the case. This is where you need to shore it up. We'll give you 87 days to provide us that information.
Yeah, and the nice thing is, because there's human trafficking is so important and such a priority to the folks down in DC, the officers are they very much want to approve the petition. So they always give the chance of, you know, hey, you have this, but I need this. Can you get it? So that's really nice.
They're very well trained. It's an office that's in Vermont. So it's if you do like a regular immigration process, it goes to, you know, an office down in Laguna Niguel or different places. But for T visas, U visas, it's all this one specialized office where they get a lot of training on it. And they've been more responsive than other areas of immigration.
All right, let's go ahead and give these guys a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming out. We're going to take a really quick 5-minute break. Our next speaker, Kathy, we've already cut into some of her time. So please do just stretch it out or stay here if you need to, you know, and we'll get started in 5 minutes. Back. So if you could just grab one real quick. Thank you.
this mic? Yeah, there we go. I come from Santa Rosa. I've been working with immigrants since 1988. I'm fluent in Spanish. I wear two hats. I work for a nonprofit. I did a lot of educational programs for our nonprofit. And then we switched to Citizenship in the late 90s. We had a lot of state contracts. We would travel all over the state helping people apply for citizenship for free. I had a federal contract recently. We did 700 citizenship applications in 1 year for free, paid by the federal government. And around 2000, we moved into the area of immigration. I'm a Board of Immigration Appeals accredited rep. You have to work for a nonprofit for that. And the idea is that you charge nominal fees. Our fees are about 1/3 the cost of attorneys. You have to get reaccredited every 3 years. Your agency is accredited, which protects it from suit. It's a great program because many immigrants are very low income and they can get high quality legal work at very low fees. So I might charge $600 or $700 for an adjustment to get someone a green card, and attorneys would charge $2,500, maybe more. We have a full service immigration program. We do everything from counselor processing, bringing people in legally from other countries, including fiancé visas. We do adjustment of status to get green cards. We remove restrictions on 2-year green cards. We do U visas. Last summer, I started 601A waivers for unlawful presence, which usually people in my position don't do. We were referring that out to attorneys for a long time. But I decided if I could do it, I could save the clients a lot of money. And I've won my first case. I have 2 more out there. I ran them by the Immigrant Legal Resource Center in San Francisco, which is a great resource. They have attorneys, immigration attorneys on staff to support people like me to make sure our clients get quality work. I'm also an ESL instructor at the junior college, and that is quite a ticket with immigrants. When you can say that you're a teacher, you kind of get instant respect, particularly in the Latino community. This portfolio here, I'm not going to talk too much about it. I created it for the Department of Social Services grant that we have right now, which is paying for legal services for clients, and we have to reach 1,500 people, so that's a lot of misinformation out there about all kinds of immigration remedies can be turned around so people have accurate information. And then we're doing actual legal work for DACA, the young people that came in the country before the age of 16. And then we can do other remedies if you're DACA eligible or DAPA. These are DAPA's held up in the courts right now. If you're eligible for DACA or DAPA and something else, we can do the something else for free for about 20 clients, and that can save as much as $700 for people. So I'm doing green card applications and U visas for people who are DAPA or DACA eligible. The other clients pay us a fee of $600 for U visas. In here is a little flyer on U visas. And here is a flyer on the court decision. It's going to be made this June out of the Supreme Court when Obama tried to extend DACA to include more people. And offered DAPA to the parents who had U.S. citizen-born children, and the parents had arrived in the country by January 1st, 2010. Republicans went to court immediately and stopped the program, saying Obama did not have the right to offer those by executive action. He was overstepping his authority. So the Supreme Court is going to decide this June whether those programs can go forward or not. On this side is an agenda that we cover when I give presentations. I'm not going to follow this here because I'm here to speak more about U visas, but it's kind of like a chess game. You want to see everything that someone's eligible for and which would be cheaper, which would be faster, which has less risks. So I liken it to chess moves, although I'm not a chess player. There are 3 papers in here in Spanish and English that explain the DAPA program that's going to be decided by the Supreme Court this June, the DACA program, and how to the citizenship program, applying for U.S. citizenship. We use self-assessment forms when we do a presentation like this to determine who's eligible for what. And then we take them back to the office and analyze them and have workshops to actually do legal work for people. And this is a DACA one, a DAPA one, citizenship, and one in Spanish and English that gets to other remedies that people might be eligible for and unaware of. So let me launch into the U-Visa program here. The history of U-Visa is that our communities were becoming less safe due to the fact that undocumented people were unwilling to call police to report crimes. So it was decided that if they came forward and made police reports, and the crime was one of a list of 25 crimes, which are violent crimes, that they could apply for a U-Visa and eventually get a green card if the U-Visa is approved. And the idea was that they would be less afraid to contact police and our communities would be safer for all of us. That's the concept. The benefits of a U-Visa are that everything gets excused, unlike many other immigration benefits. For example, the illegal entry is excused. The fact that you might have now accrued the 10-year bars because you've been here more than a year and a day illegally, that gets excused. The fact that you might have come in and out several times and have triggered what's called the permanent bar, for which there's no relief. The fact that you might have been deported by an immigration judge and came back into the US. The fact that you might have some crimes yourself, such as petty thefts or DUIs, even domestic violence crimes. Now, when people have crimes like that they've committed themselves, we go into a different mode in their U-Visa application, which is to show that they've changed their pattern. They don't expect to repeat. We get letters of support. We get a separate statement from them of how it is that they're not going to engage in criminal activity again. So another big benefit of U-Visas is you can include your family in the petition. Right now, I'm doing, a child was sexually assaulted by his mother's husband. There was a divorce in the family. The mother, well, actually, there wasn't a divorce. They were never married. They had a child. They separated before the child was born. The mother married someone, and he was abusing the child. The father got instant custody. The abuser is in jail. But the child was born here, is a U.S. citizen, does not need a U-Visa. So who am I getting a green card for? Hopefully, the father. So you can include parents, you can include husbands and wives, you can include children, you can even include children who are living outside the country. And if you win your U-Visa, they will be admitted and reunited with the family. So that is a huge benefit. The eligibility is that there are 25 crimes. They're not totally hard fast. I mean, a lot of people come to us and they've been assaulted, but there was no weapon involved, and that's more like a misdemeanor and not a crime that makes you easily eligible for a U-Visa. I did win a case where a gentleman was assaulted by someone high on cocaine in his apartment complex for no reason whatsoever, no provocation. And his eye was messed up. He couldn't work for several months. His knee was messed up. And by getting the medical records and fighting the government a little bit, I did get him a U-Visa. So you have to have filed a police report. That's the other thing that's required in a U-Visa. There are no costs involved except to the agency like my own. The government waives all the fees, but you have to show your monthly expenses and your income and ask that the fees be forgiven, and they always are. So I'm going to talk about the process a little bit. the person calls us and expresses interest in applying for a U visa. They've often been referred, or my best referrer, I won't give her name, she works in a district attorney's office and she's a victim's advocate, and she was unhappy with the service at a nonprofit in Marin. They weren't answering phone calls, they weren't moving forward. And I don't know if they were overwhelmed or disorganized or what, but she heard about my work and she started referring people. And I've been getting referrals for her for about 4 years now. We've been doing U visas for about 5 or 6 years. My first case was a young woman whose father brought her up here with her mother from Mexico City illegally. And then he proceeded to sexually abuse her for a couple of years. And he was doing the same thing with another daughter of his by another mother in another house. And my client became pregnant. She tried to tell the authorities that it was a boyfriend. She finally admitted the truth. She had to have a late-term abortion. They showed her that the foot of the baby was deformed, and she chose to have a late-term abortion. The father is in jail for 27 years. I get quite close to my clients. She started to express guilt over feeling pleasure sometimes with the sexual activity. And I just told her, you know, we all have bodies, and that's what bodies do, whether we're eating a good meal or... I don't think you should be feeling guilty, but I do think you should get back with your therapist because you quit after 4 months. And for what's happened to you, I think you need some more time. So we won the case. It was a slam dunk. It was a good beginning as far as easy to win. And I've recently applied for her green card. In the meantime, she married a man. And at the point when you are applying for your green card after getting a U visa, if you married, you can file a Form I-929 and a marriage certificate and other documents and apply for your spouse. So I've done that for him. The process is we take $50 for clients. They give us the police report. We file 918 Supplement B, and you need to send it to the police that made the report or the district attorney's office in the county where the crime happened. There's no time limitation on these crimes. If you have the police report, it could be a very old crime, you can go ahead and file. So it's important to establish relationships with the police departments in your area, in your county or nearby counties, and people in the district attorney's office. In the beginning, I think there were some police departments that were not very sympathetic to this program. It seems to have changed over time, and I'm getting less resistance. But when I started, I was warned about that, and not to provoke them, not to get confrontational with them. And that's part of doing U visas. So when the Supplement B comes back signed, then you have 6 months before that Supplement B will expire. You could get it submitted again and get a new date, but that's taking up the time of the police and district attorney people. So you want to get your U visa submitted during that 6 months. The thing that takes the longest is I send all my clients to therapists for 2 reasons. One, they need help recovering from the trauma they've experienced so they can truly move forward with their lives. And the other is to get a letter from the therapist explaining how this crime has affected them. And we see things like depression, post-traumatic stress, hypervigilant, terms like that. And a recommendation that the U visa be approved usually. So the packet includes a lot of things. Let's see, we have the Supplement B, the police report, a G28 that says I'm the legal representative of the client so that I can interface with the government if necessary. The therapist letter, birth certificate of the client translated into English, current passport from the client's home country, a declaration like they mentioned with the T visa that I have to translate from Spanish to English. And I do not make those very long, and I have not lost a U visa case yet. However, I do have 1.5 drawers full waiting, because as the gentleman explained, the wait has become very long. There are 95,000 U visas filed last time I heard, and only 10,000 per year can be approved. It would be nice, I'm sure there's some people advocating for more approvals per year, but that's what we need really. I mean, if these people really deserve this, they are victims of serious crimes, I think we should get more approved so they're not waiting so long. Many of the crimes are sexual in nature, sexual abuse or rape, sexual abuse of children, domestic violence, but you have to take the government's point of view. Let's say it's a domestic violence case, but there are no witnesses whatsoever to any violence any time during the relationship and no physical injuries. I have a deaf client who was raped by someone in her apartment complex on 2 occasions. Unfortunately, the police stopped them at one point, and the guy who was about to rape her convinced the police that she was his girlfriend, and the police left the scene. This was about 11 o'clock at night under a bridge. But because she did not get one of those rape tests, we have no proof, really. So my only thought was the therapist could say that her emotional state was consistent with someone who'd been raped or abused. So you have to realize that though maybe a terrible thing has happened and you believe your client, where's your proof? So if you have witnesses, that's good. They can submit letters and we might have to translate them into English. If there's physical injury, the police often take pictures at the scene. So the forms that we have to file, the form for a U visa is called an I-918. And if you're filing for family members, it's an I-918 Supplement A. And those can be filed with the original application, or they can be filed while we're in the 2.5-year waiting process. There's an I-192. That form is to ask the government to forgive anything that might make the person what's called inadmissible. For all of them, it's their illegal entry. If they've had a DUI or petty theft or something, you have to list everything there. You have to be sure that you list every entry they've made because you're asking for forgiveness for all those illegal entries. And if you miss some, you'll get a letter from the government asking that you explain that or provide more information. The fee waiver I mentioned is just your monthly living expenses and the income you have to pay for that, and that's asking the government to forgive the fees for the Form I-918 for the U visa and the Form I-192. Those 2 forms have fees associated with them. So then you two photographs. You submit the packet with certified mail, and you wait for the client to be fingerprinted. And then sometimes, maybe 2 years later, when they feel they're going to approve this case, but there's no visa available for the client yet, they offer them a letter saying they can apply for their work permit. And sometimes we work with the attorneys to keep people from being deported, and the judges are often, immigration judges, sympathetic. So if they see that the person has filed a U visa, a judge might delay court dates that would lead to a deportation because the person appears to have some relief, which is the U visa. I had a client, for instance, her 2 children were brought up from Guatemala illegally by her sister and were caught at the border, and the children were put in deportation proceedings. But because I was filing a U visa for her and those children, who under normal circumstances would have come up after the U visa was granted, they would have been immigrated with visas into the US to join their mother. Instead, here they were, so I filed the Supplement A's for those children, and the judge, and of course, receipt notices, as soon as I got them, receipt notices from the government, I was faxing them to the attorney to show the judge, and we managed to keep this family from deportation. I'll just tell you a couple stories and then open it for questions. I had a client from El Salvador, and it's this gang, I think it's called MS in El Salvador, very vicious gang. They told this lady that if she had a small store in El Salvador in a market, if she didn't give $50 a day to them, they were going to kill her daughter. Well, she didn't have the $50, and so they killed her daughter. So then they came to my client with the same thing, and my client fled to Mexico with the daughter, and she got into the U.S. illegally, and then the daughter was abused in the apartment complex by a Latino young man who'd already abused 2 other girls, but somehow he was still loose. So he took my client and another little girl into the laundry room and sexually abused them. So I'm getting a U visa for her and both her parents. And sometimes you'll have one sibling that was born out of the country. You could do the supplement A for them, and you might have 2 kids that were born here. Another client came into the U.S. with a cousin, and while they were in a house on the Mexican side of the border, waiting to cross the next day, the coyote and the federales appeared in the middle of the night. The federales assaulted my client sexually. They demanded $2,000 of all the people waiting in the house that they get the money from some relatives in the U.S. Once they had all the money, they dumped the people inside the U.S. and said, if you come back to Mexico, we'll see that you're killed, because these people could recognize him. Then my client was caught by Border Patrol, and she identified the coyote as a drug trafficker as well as trafficking in people, told what village he lived in, gave his name, and they allowed her to come on into the U.S. She joined up with her husband. And then the 7-year-old daughter, who was in Mexico with her parents, was being threatened by, I don't know if it was the federales or the coyote or both. So they told the parents, bring the daughter to the border, 7-year-old child. Grandparents told her to walk across the border and tell the men with the uniforms that she wanted to apply for asylum. And the child got asylum, and we're getting U visas. Then she was sexually abused also. So not very pretty stories. And I feel good about trying to help people recover from terrible things like I've just told you. So we're well ahead of schedule, which is good. I could just let you ask questions now. Let's see if I have anything more in my notes. I did mention the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. There is a manual about this thick on U visas, which is our Bible, and they will answer questions for practitioners like myself to make sure that I have the best legal advice possible so I don't waste clients' time. I've never gotten anyone deported from the United States, and I've been doing this since 2000. I'm very picky. I have a little thing in my brain that says if I'm not 100% sure of something, I need to talk to an attorney or, to find out. I see people who make guesses. That's a disaster in this field. I mean, I'm pretty liberal as a person politically, but in this aspect of my life, I am extremely picky. And it saves my clients loss of money, time, maybe deportation. So I sleep very well at night. So I'll just open it up to questions. Okay.
Any questions about the U visa?
So I see you're out of Santa Rosa. Do you have any connections with other counties or a network of people that you refer to if somebody's out of the county that you're servicing?
We have an immigration office in our Lodi office. My corporation has a large Department of Labor grant to help farm workers. We have 10 offices, like in Dixon, Woodland, Yuba City, Stockton, Lodi, Napa. We have housing programs. We have drug rehab programs. We do a lot of things. I would love to have immigration offices in all these farm worker service offices that we have, but the problem is that the unemployment rate in rural counties is double digits. So even while people have immigration needs, they don't have the money to pay even our fees. And you cannot support this kind of program with fees alone. You can expect to pay your bills with about 40% coming from the fees. So you have to get grants. And when you get into an area where people are really impoverished, unlike Sonoma County, they can't even afford our fees. So it's hard for us to have offices there. I've managed to open an office in Lodi, though.
Oh, the interpreter speaking for Daniel. I think it's interesting. Mine is more of a comment, but I think it's interesting out there when we see a lot of political feelings about how immigration hurts the economy and our economic growth. But I don't think I realized the situation behind people looking for visas and for benefits because of, you know, they're victims of these horrible things. And it's interesting to me. So thank you very much for your information.
You're welcome. And of course, when they get the U visa, they get Social Security card, work permit, and eligible for Medi-Cal, for unemployment, and they cannot be deported. And I didn't mention that when you get your U visa, you have to stay in that status for 3 years. You cannot leave the country. And after 3 years, you have 1 year to apply for your green card, and you have to submit documentation to prove you were here the whole 3 years. And the adjustment of status is a little different than a regular adjustment of status. You have to write a declaration in English of why you feel you deserve a green card. You have to make a statement under penalty of perjury that you haven't left the country, and you continue to be willing to cooperate with police if asked in the pursuit of the crime. So you have that 1 year window to apply for your green card after you've had U visa status for 3 years.
Which crimes qualify for a U visa?
Well, you could probably Google it, but any kind of assault where there's a deadly weapon involved, even stalking is a newer crime that has been accepted. Domestic violence, battery on a spouse, lots of sexual crimes. I think kidnapping is one. And you could read the list, but like I say, I have won some cases that weren't on the list. You just need to warn clients, you know, we might not win this case. There's a case that I've kind of given up on. The lady was insistent upon applying. She was harassed in a store. She was pregnant, Peruvian. A homeless woman was insulting her verbally, pushed her a couple times. But I said, look, I know that was a terrible experience and left you very shaken and feeling vulnerable, being pregnant, that you might fall down or hurt your child. I get all that, but I don't think we can win this case for you. And sure enough, the government said that wasn't one of the 25 crimes. And I said, I don't know how to fight your case unless you can get a doctor to say that your pregnancy was at risk, or, I mean, I kind of warned you that this would happen. But people are so desperate. They don't want to believe you if you say to them it was a crime, and they're grasping at a straw since there's nothing else available to them.
Do you work with Family Justice Center in Sonoma County at all? Refer some of the victims to them?
Do I refer victims to them?
Yes.
No, the only place I refer our victims is to therapists, and there are networks to get the therapy for free, and they're bilingual therapists and counselors, and I've heard very good reports from my clients about how much it's helped them in recovery. You have to be pretty psychologically savvy to work with these clients. I had a young woman come in who was raped while 4 or 5 guys stood around and watched. Her brother was in a wheelchair because the hospital made some serious mistake with whatever medical issue he had, and they sued the hospital. I believe they won that. And she had such a chip on her shoulder. You don't want to help me. And I finally said, look, you need to learn who can help you and who doesn't want to help you and who does, because you're wrong. I do want to help you. And I am going to help you. But a lot of people need my help. So you need to be a little patient. And I will get you this U visa. So, I mean, you have to understand psychological states people are in and not take it personally. In fact, she hasn't been calling me. She's now slipping back and going to miss her opportunity to get this status, I'm afraid. I keep calling her.
Yes, it was mentioned earlier that the T visa process is a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's for the U visa process. I know you mentioned 2 years to apply for the U visa, as they said for the T visa to receive it,
Mm-hmm.
but then it takes 7 years to receive the green card.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a 1 year delay, you said, after you receive the U visa, but then how long for the green card?
No, there's a 3-year delay. But the point is, you're in protective status. You cannot be deported. You have authority to be in this country. You have a work permit. You have a Social Security card. You're eligible for a lot of benefits. The worst is that you cannot leave the country to go see family members. When you get your green card, you can travel and eventually apply for citizenship. And you can apply for other family members once you have a green card and citizenship. But as I mentioned, you can include a lot of your family on the U visa, and they will get green cards as well. So yes, I would like to see this time shortened, but for some reason, Congress, I guess it's Congress, has decided that only 10,000 visas can be approved in a year. But the U visa program is more forgiving with all kinds of things that make you legally inadmissible to the U.S. They forgive everything. I even had a deportation, and I called an attorney. I said, are they going to forgive this? And they said, yep. So that's the good thing about the U visa program. I think the T visa is more restrictive. I don't do T visas because I live in a semi-rural area. I think that trafficking is more common in urban areas. And we just don't get people calling asking for help with that. If I did, I would gin up and learn how to do them.
Any other questions? All right, Kathy, thank you so much. Let's give Kathy a hand. Really appreciate you coming down. She had to travel since 7:30 this morning, so we really appreciate it. Have a nice lunch, everyone.